Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of In Conversation Live. In Conversation Live is a sort of hybrid between Desert Island Discs without any music and a program that many of you will remember in the psychiatrist chair that Professor Anthony Clare did in the 1980s and 90s. Well, tonight we've got a very special guest, a very famous guest, Dame Parveen Kumar, British doctor, professor of medicine and education at Barts and the London School of Medicine. She's worked in the NHS for more than 40 years as a consultant gastroenterologist, and she was president of the BMA of the Royal Society of Medicine from 2010 to 2012, the Medical Women's Federation, the Royal Medical Benevolent Fund, and also vice president of the Royal College of Physicians. In addition, she's the founding non-executive director of the National Institute of Clinical Excellence, NICE. She chaired the Medicals Commission until 2005 and the Bupa Foundation charity. Most famously, she's co-founded and co-edited Kumar and Clark's Clinical Medicine, now in its 10th edition, a medical textbook that's used around the world. She's also held a load of leadership roles in medical education. She set up an MSc course in gastroenterology. She continues to teach, and she was awarded DBE or Damehood in 2017, CBE in 2000, the BMA Gold Medal in 2007, and was the first Asian Professional Woman of the Year in 1999. Parveen, you are a bit of a superstar. Welcome this evening to In Conversation Live. Well, let's start off, Parveen, with your book, because I mean you've done so many things, but that Kumar and Clark I've read. I bet most of the people watching this program tonight will have read, and people have read it all over the globe. Tell us how you came up with that idea of that book right from the beginning.
Well, Roger, thank you very much. Can I just first of all thank you very much for asking me, and also the RSM, which is a wonderful place, I always think. So the book, Roger, well, I was sitting at my desk and I got a letter from another author, I think it was Swami Moxham, to write a chapter for them. I was sort of a middling registrar when I was doing research, really. And he'd asked me to write a chapter on gastroenterology, and I said, delighted, you know. And then Mike Clark, who was my supervisor, read all the letters, because they were all laid out on the secretary's bench. In those days, you typed and had carbon copies. Do you remember? 18th century. Yeah. Anyway, so he saw this, stormed into my room and said, "You will not be doing that because I own you. You haven't written all those papers. You get down and write the papers rather than doing this rubbish stuff." Anyway, he realized I was going to carry on. So he said he'd help. And that's how it all started.
And was there a battle? Was it Clark and Kumar or Kumar and Clark?
We left that to the publishers.
Right.
I'd actually written something for one of the publishers, so I phoned them on the Friday night, and was surprised to hear them say, "We'll be at your desk on Monday morning. Don't talk to anybody else." So clearly they were looking for somebody to write a textbook, and then we came along. And they obviously thought we weren't good enough, so they sort of got somebody to look after us over above us, but then decided that he just gave up after Mike and I started, because it was hard work, but it was, in the beginning, we weren't quite sure how to do it. We tried, I think the first chapters we wrote 18 times, and the chapters have been edited in trains and planes, at the BSG, at the American Gastro Meeting. Anywhere we went, we were kind of editing.
It was a labor of love, was it? Was it Balliere and Tyndall, the publisher?
It started with Balliere and Tyndall, then it seemed to go on to W.B. Saunders, then Elsevier.
These publishing companies just got taken over by bigger and bigger companies, didn't they?
And now Elsevier, I think, owns the whole thing.
But, I think what was unusual about your book was that you and Mike edited it so closely. I mean, a lot of editors, actually including me, just let the chapters come in and kind of bung them in as they are. But that wasn't your approach.
No, we edited we looked it up, every single fact. And I remember in those days, we didn't have the benefit of the internet. So the library was super at Barts. We used to empty the library into the boots of our cars, bring them home for the weekend. and worked through the weekend, really checking every fact. And I think Mike had a very good memory, because, you know, for example, if you're going to talk about calcium, you'd be mentioning it in endocrinology, in nutrition, in arthritis, and, you know, in the rheumatology chapter, all over the place, and the gut as well. But he could remember where everything was, and you know, we really worked hard at it. It was I always say nobody thanks you for writing a textbook, but if you've done a bit of research, they will thank you a lot. And I think we probably looked at more books and did more literature searches than you know, over the 3 years. I think they first said it would take us 3 or 4 years to write the book, and we actually wrote it in 2.5 years. But that was just constantly going at it. And really, our families were amazing that they allowed us to work over weekends. I think we got Saturday night off, and we finished slightly earlier on the Sunday. Otherwise, midweek, you know, I'd get home, talk to the kids. Mike would then turn up at about 8 to 10. We worked. Then Mike and David, my husband, had a drink while I went and ironed the school uniform, or try to find out who was going to take them to school the next day. So it was you know, it was very much boxing and coxing with David.
There's a question actually from Joseph Yacona. Thank you, David. You're welcome, by the way, to send your questions in. We will try and ask as many as we can. I will try and ask as many as I can. Joseph says, how does Dame Parveen feel having displaced the book Davidson's Principles and Practice? I mean, that was the textbook that you managed to sort of shove out of the way, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, quite honestly, I mean, no sort of thing, but Davidson was the reason why I wrote the textbook, because I learned absolutely nothing when I was a medical student. It was verbose. It was page after page of. It wasn't fun, Roger, and we wanted to make it fun, which is why and also they used to say we will consider. Now, we would never use the word consider or may, because we looked up the facts and said, well, this is what you should do. And this is why we had the bullet points, to make it much more, because, you know, considering, you could come to the wrong answer. And if you considered and got it wrong, you kill the patient. It's not a nice thing to do, really.
No, it's a fantastic book. And I think it is a lot more helpful than David's. I read both of them, I remember, as a medical student. And it's definitely a better book. So, but it, you know, must have taken a bit of a toll on you as a mum and as a clinician and as a researcher. I mean, all that work. Do you think, looking back now, do you think your husband David, and we'll come on to talk about him, another famous doctor, of course, and your children, did they pay a price for that book, would you say?
I think, you know, I also ask my children, but I think they now appreciate it. I think at the time, I remember once when, you know, we had about 6 months off between editions, and then we were back on again, you know, and putting in the details of every single topic. Mike would write down, you know, all the, from every, you know, every journal, any new fact was going in for all the specialties. So I remember coming back one day when we'd sort of finished, and I was quite early, and saw the kids with the nanny watching television whilst eating. And I said, but, you know, Rachel said, we don't do this sort of thing. We talk when we're eating. And they said, Mummy, you haven't been here, you know, so you can't tell us what to do. And that, you know, that brought tears into my eyes. It was awful.
But your two girls grew up, and one a doctor and the other a business lady. Is that right?
An executive, and yes, it's Rachel who's, I think.
Well, let's go back to the beginning, because there were all sorts of exciting things happened in your early life. I mean, I'm actually really, really lucky to be looking at you, because you shouldn't have even survived childhood, should you, really, realistically? I mean, the danger involved in those things. Just talk us through, you know, the two crises, the partition of India and then the Chinese Revolution. I mean, these are massive world events that people still talk about, and you were in the thick of it, to use an expression. Tell us about that.
I mean, it's amazing that I am where I am, really. So I was born in Lahore, which was then in India, and I had two brothers, Proudest, who was 2 years older than me, and Javed, who's 18 months younger than her. So we were all three sort of below the age of 5. and we were in Lahore, and I remember standing outside watching the riots go by, and crowds thinking Pakistan's Zindabad, meaning long live Pakistan, and really being quite terrified. And my ayah, the nanny, would then take us back and hide us back in the whole. Anyway, my mother managed to try and get from one to the other, because the partition was going right the way through. And we all thought Lahore would stay in India, but in fact, the Englishman who drew the line between India and Pakistan drew it the wrong way around for us anyway. So my mother amazingly managed to get us onto a convoy, all three of us under 5. I think my younger brother was in arms, babe in arms. Across, it took us 2 days to get to outside Delhi. And of course, then we had nowhere to stay. So we stayed in refugee tents for quite a long time. Because my father had been seconded by Nehru to the United Nations to China. So he'd been there for a year, and we were sort of vaguely trying to see whether we could go across and meet him out there. Anyway, so we were there quite a long time. And then my mother, who really is quite amazing, because she was one of few, maybe 2 people who had, women rather, because my grandfather believed in educating everybody, not just men. So she went to university, did a BA, then went on to an MA. So she's obviously a fairly bright cookie. So anyways, she managed to bring us across there and had to sort of start working, because in those days, women just didn't work. You played bridge and drank, I think, in those days, whatever you did. Anyway, she managed then to get us from Delhi to Calcutta by train, and then we took a plane, one of those old planes where you actually had proper laid out beds, before they sort of became, sort of business class now here. But those days you did that, and we then managed to get to Shanghai and met up with her father, and then lived in Nanking, or
Right.
as it's called then, Nanjing now.
And then what happened?
Well, it was then a nightmare, really, because we were now settled down. The family was together, and for once we were together. After a year or 2 years, when of course we heard the communists were coming down. Of course, we were in nationalist China. So my father then managed to get us all, onto a plane about 3 weeks before, I think, they were taking over Nanking. And we went back to Delhi. He, I think, must have caught the last plane out of Shanghai before that was taken. And we went back to Delhi. And then, because now, having lost everything in China, now lost everything in China, lost everything in India, then China. My father, would you believe it, was working, so we managed to get to a public school, the Lawrence School Sanaa, which was just absolutely brilliant school. Brought us up amazingly well, and my mother had to stop working. So because my father lost his eyesight, so this was the triple whammy. What my mother was going through, I have absolutely no idea. So now we didn't have a home. We lost everything in Pakistan. We lost everything in whatever we had in China. And we had to sort of start again. So my mother then started working. She taught at Sanaa for a bit, the Lawrence School Sanaa. And I have to say that school was just amazing. It was run by the English. It used to be called the Royal St. Lawrence Royal Military School Sanaa.
And this is in the Himalaya, right?
In the Himalayas, just in the foothills of the Himalayas.
Yeah.
And really
very, very famous school, right?
Very famous school, and we learned Sanskrit, Latin, French, and English. But when I came over with my mother, she put me. I had to get a sort of a governor's place in a grammar school, but they put me in the bottom row of everything. And then by the end of the term, I think the schooling in Sanaa was so good that I was in the top of every class, just because of what I'd learned.
And you mentioned a teacher there, Mr. Carter, who was influenced on you.
Mr. Carter was the headmaster
Right.
and a fairly strict disciplinarian. But his son Timothy, or we called him Tup, was in my brother's year. So all 3 of us went to boarding schools. So my brother was in the same school. my brother was in the boys' department. My younger brother Javed was in the young, and I was in the ladies. So the whole hill was a school in different areas. We were all sort of had our dormitories and met up in the classroom. But the coincidence was that when I came to England and I haven't finished school, I was applying, and I applied to London. I applied for a medical school in Vancouver, where we had friends, and I also applied in India, in Delhi, and I got into Barts. And it was only through another friend of mine who said, "Oh, that's interesting, because Tim Carter's at Barts as well." And there was this chap who was the son of the headmaster, 7,000 miles away in the same medical school. And the extraordinary thing is he now also lives only, quite close to me in Cheam. So
how old were you when you left India to come to England then?
So I was approaching my 13th, 14th birthday. So it was between that time.
And you came on a boat, the P&O
Yes, the Batory. I remember it well. So the reason I can never listen to Life on the Ocean Waves, they played it every day before lunch, on the Tanhoy, which is awful. Right. But my mother obviously schooled me, because it took 3 weeks.
Right.
And we arrived in England with nothing but all our luggage, including sort of cabin trunks with GK written on, with 1, 2, 3, because you had to get it all. And then she took up a job, first of all as a warden in a hospital. I mean, she was a remarkable lady. And then
was it just you and her, or did your brothers come too?
Well, first of all, she brought me over, and then my younger brother came over, and then my older brother finished senior Cambridge, was equivalent to O levels in those days here. Right. So he went there. So for a lady who, thank goodness for her, because my older brother went to Imperial College and did aeronautical engineering, and then became a professor in Canada. He went off there and did various good things and trained the astronauts there. My younger brother's probably been to more countries, almost every country in the world, I think, and speaks endless languages. But he's both my brothers are very bright. I mean, I'm afraid I'm the dud, really. But my younger brother is the one who cultures me, really. He's good on music, used to take off his, taught himself the piano and various other things. But,
and you got
managed. He went to Oxford and got in with classics, so he still speaks Latin, Greek, and ancient history, but and did ancient history. But he then changed to PPE because he thought, what was he going to do with the classics? It would be rather difficult.
And your father stayed back in India, or eventually came over to join you?
Well, sadly, he was blind. There's nothing you could do there. He came over for a couple of years, and I think my mother just couldn't cope. But working, feeding us all, and doing everything while we all worked.
Yeah, but he was an economist, so he must have given you some of the genetic material that allowed you to succeed. But is your mother your inspiration then?
I think so. I think she said, nothing was impossible. Yeah, particularly for a girl, and education was topmost. And it's quite interesting. Many years later, I went to Lahore and went to the Christian. Sorry, all three of us have got a Christian name, a Muslim name, and a Hindu name.
Right.
Because we're Christians. But I went to the Christian cemetery in Lahore once when I was lecturing there, and it was like sort of walking down the past of my family. Because, as I walked down, there was so-and-so, there was Uncle so-and-so, there was Grandpa, there was so-and, all people down there. But they seemed to turn out to be a lot to do with education, but also to do with medicine. Yeah. I realized there were a few medics in the family further back.
Well, Ramesh Mutu, thanks Ramesh, is saying, what were the major motivating factors through your amazing career? Was it your mother, who must have been a pretty feisty lady, those escapes from India to China, back to India, across to England? I mean, wow, that's pretty extraordinary. What are your motivating? What drives you? Because you're still working so hard now, Parveen, aren't you?
Yes, I'm doing those things. I think I've seen her obviously working very hard, and both my parents, and I think all three of us were obviously motivated just by her, I think. I
Yeah.
think she was a remarkable lady, and how she didn't break down with, sort of every time everything happening. It was all pretty hard.
Yeah.
But I think, women can do anything, and I was sort of great protagonists of women, really.
Yeah.
I've been over the years.
Well, you were one of the first lady consultants at Barts. I mean, maybe we'll go on to Barts, but grammar school, you got into Barts as a medical school. Didn't you also have a place at Cambridge as well, which you?
Yes, which I couldn't afford.
Yeah.
I mean, remember at that stage, we were all staying in one room.
Yeah. Wow.
And we had a toilet down the stairs. The bathroom had a desk, which funnily I still have, in the garage, which is where we all worked. So when everybody had their baths and so on, so we turn on the light and we would work. In the bathroom, we just took it in turns where we did. So that's how we sort of managed it.
And when
and
you
all along, can I just say, my mother,
Yeah.
all along, I think that sense of giving, because at the age of 78 or whatever she was, getting on to 80, guess who was delivering the Meals on Wheels for the people of Guildford? There was my mother in a sari. She always wore a sari with snow boots on, knocking on the old people's doors to say, here's your meal on wheels. I mean, it was remarkable, and she did all sorts of voluntary work, particularly over the war. Despite all this going on, she was in the Women's Voluntary Service, helping out. And I think that's sort of rubbed out on all three of us, I think.
Yeah. Well, and let's talk a little bit about women in medicine, because now the majority of medical students are women, but still a lot of the senior positions are occupied by men. I mean, there still is a bit of a glass ceiling. Maybe it's breaking down, but I mean, you were a pioneer in that, along with Carol Black, who we had on this show a few weeks ago now. Pretty amazing lady.
Amazing lady, yeah.
But I mean, tell me that story about how you were, the club that you were in, that where you had an experience.
Well, the problem is at Barts, I think in my first year, there were about, 8 women to 160 men or something. And it's quite interesting. We still meet up. We have a reunion of 1966 qualifiers. But I then did a BSc in physiology. And so we went to the next year, and I think the dean had been told if he didn't take on more women, he would lose the money from the university. So we had a lot more women. But, because there were no other women, I was sort of doing everything. I wasn't particularly good at everything, but I was the sort of hockey captain. I started the fencing club because I fenced at school. So I thought I might as well continue and had to start it. I was also president of the Abenethi Society, where we invited all sorts of people, including Colin Davis. Remember Leslie Davis Dawson's uncle, and J.Z. Young and not Henry Kissinger, but Arthur. What was it? The explorer called? I've forgotten his name now. But we had a fascinating time, and really, women were few and far between. So as you went up, as people used to say, they're a great house officer, but then they're hopeless and they got run out on them. Anyway, I was the only woman on the gastro team for 20 years because I ticked the female, which is equality. I ticked the diversity, being Indian. And I think the boys were trying to make me handicapped so that they could tick all three, to sort of take people on. But I remember once Tony Dawson, Sir Anthony Dawson, took Mike Clark was the second head, but there were 3 of us, and I think another male registrar went to the Garrick Club, and because I'd now been sort of accepted as a chap, you walked into the Garrick Club, and suddenly there was a bit of whispering going on, and I was totally bundled out of the bar. And I think that was awful. It's
I think you said that was the worst thing that ever happened to you.
I just thought, stupid men. I mean, it really sort of upset me. And the other thing was when I was the Medical Women's Federation president, I hadn't realized, really rather like the RMBF, that a lot of women are still having huge amount of problems.
Yeah.
It's that they get so far and then they're stymied by men. And I think, we just got, I mean, I don't see gender, I don't see color. I mean, I see a person, and they ought to be given, given their rights as to what they do.
Yeah. Well, Henrietta Bowden Jones, Etta,
Etta, yeah, she became president after me, I think.
Yeah. The Medical Women's Federation. She said she loved working with you. Tell us, how you led that. I mean, that was a pioneering organization, wasn't it?
Oh, it was. I mean, it started off with, I think, 7 women meeting. Would you believe it, in 19 something in a pub? Would you believe it? By the waters in the East End of London, somewhere by the water. And I was president for the 100th anniversary. So, we knew all the stories about how, Elizabeth Garrett Anderson couldn't get into medical school and got into the apothecaries by the name of Garrett, Garrett. And then they realized she was a woman and said, no, you can't come here. And her father said, well, he would take them to court if she wasn't accepted. So he had to, they had to take her on, although I think she wasn't allowed to do various things. But eventually, 2 years later, the apothecaries changed the rules so that women couldn't apply. So I think we've come a long way from that. I mean, we sort of stand on giants, really, who really led the way. But so this was the 100th anniversary, so we had a great celebration. And in fact, Jane was then the president of the Royal College of Physicians. We had an exhibition of women, current women leaders, holding the picture of somebody they were putting forward. Obviously, mine was the first president of the MWF, and there's Sheila Sherlock, all sorts of people in the past. And that did so that women were around. And I think that exhibition was, I don't know whether you saw it, the college for a long time.
Yeah.
And we had meetings where we tried to help women, assert themselves a little bit more and push, because women won't apply. And, if I get an application form, I say, I can do that, I can't do that, I can't do that, I can't do that. So I won't apply. A man will go down and say, I can do that, but I can't do that, can't do that. But he will apply. But I can, I can do it. So in a way, women are being very honest and thinking, well, we can't do that. And I remember my daughter, the non-medic, going for a interview with EY, and she said, no, I can't do that, but I could learn it. And I think she got the job, because saying that I can actually learn it.
Yeah.
And we don't get to the top, so we tend to get at the bottom, and then women fall off.
Yeah, I mean, have you got any words of advice to the women medical students, training doctors, even consultants watching? What would you say to them?
Consultants, for God's sake, take people as they are, not if they're women or they're men. Yeah. And I think with the girls, you keep applying, keep at it, be tenacious. You get there in the end.
Yeah.
And don't take no for an answer.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's right. I think things are changing now. I mean, certainly the RSM, diversity, equality, and even the Royal College of Surgeons are embracing that. And
we had Claire Marks, and Claire was amazing, the first woman after so many years.
She was badly bullied, though. Do you ever experience bullying or any kind of discrimination? There's a question about whether being an Asian lady makes it even more difficult than being.
Well, the problem is I'm so naive. I don't see it, and I remember a job I didn't get. Somebody said, "Well, I got it because I was Asian. I was British, and a woman." But I never actually saw. There was one time I had I don't lose my temper, but I lost it with this particular professor of medicine, who probably knows who he is. Right. We had a real to-do. I won't tell you who he was, okay? But we had a real to-do because he was bullying me and I wouldn't be bullied. No, and he was sort of saying, you were having these meetings without him being there, and he was in charge. And I said, no, you weren't,
Yeah.
Anyway.
I bet his surname began with B.
I'm afraid it did. He didn't talk to me for 6 months, whereas I'd forgotten it the next day.
He gave me a hard time actually when I was at Barts, but we won't go into that. Okay, let's talk
He's
about.
very nicer now.
Yeah. I think another word for you, I mean, one word for you is inspirational. Another word is resilient. And, you know, we've heard about your childhood, but there have been a few other extraordinary things: a bomb in a hotel, a fractured pelvis in Sudan. Which of those do you want to talk about, or both, maybe?
Oh, you talk about all of them. No, well, one of the things the book has done is that we're known everywhere we go. And, you know, situations where we've had audiences of 100, sort of 1,000 and 2,000 with a secondary room, and people wanting your pictures and so on. So we get jostled, and you know, we've done that. And just recently, I've been doing it by myself, which has been quite difficult. The story about the one in Dhaka, where there was a bomb in the hotel, was really quite funny, because we were bungled out of the airport, and so you must get in because there's a curfew. Somebody's just killed the health minister, and the exam was cancelled. So I asked to go to. There was a cricket match on, so I've got two brothers. And I'm Indian, so I'm a cricketer as well. Interested in cricket. So they said, no, you can't go. And then the head of the medical services, who just happened to turn up at the hotel, said, of course you can go. So we were put into an ambulance, lay down, and taken to the match. I had a student who phoned me up. They always call him Mam. And this lovely chap, Mamoon, put us in an ambulance, and he requisitioned an ambulance, and we saw the match, which was lovely. And we eventually got back, and that evening there was a terrible bang, and I came running out of my room and thought, what's happened? And the other examiner had gone into the hostelry across the road with Mamoon, because it was much cheaper there, about 10 times cheaper in price for a drink. And they thought a tire burst, until somebody came running in and said, no, it's a bomb, it's a bomb. Anyway, what was happening was there was going to be the Seattle conference with all the prime ministers coming to our hotel, and they'd done the bomb. But we had to then get out after having done an exam and two, and we just managed to get from Dhaka to Calcutta to Delhi, and then managed to catch a plane back home. And the excuse in the papers was they were just testing out the security to see that it worked. That was extraordinary. But the Sudan, the Khartoum one, was slightly more difficult. I'd crashed. I had a crash on the skis. This is about 3 or 4 years ago, on the slopes. And luckily, I was with my family, and my son-in-law was a orthopedic surgeon, so he just checked me. I hadn't obviously broken my head or femur, which is what he thought. But I was really pretty shaken. Anyway, I got back, and that was on the Sunday. And on the Wednesday, I was meant to be in Khartoum giving a talk as the chief guest. And I phoned up and said, I can't come. Anyway, they sent a wheelchair taxi to the airport, and wheelchaired around. And the first day, they took me from my hotel to the big auditorium. There were about 1,800 people there. And they had to leave the wheelchair outside. So they carried me, sort of, two boys sort of helped me up down to sit down. And my turn came to give a talk. I had to get to the lectern. So two boys then came along, lifted me up, and I said, Fred, you've got to carry me up. So it carried me up, and then they said, can we get you a seat? And I said, no, I'm speaking for England, I'll stand. So I stood, gave my talk in utter pain, and then came down again and sat there for about 10 minutes, and then realized the pain was too much. I had to get back to the hotel. So I've called them in. So I got up, but the problem now was that the 1,800 people knew who I was, and I hadn't realized they used a textbook. I hadn't even realized that they knew about celiac disease, because a huge hospital for celiacs. Anyway, 1,600 swarmed on me, and with a painful thing that's awful. The girls had the presence of mind of being a cordon, and that was a situation where they sat on the car, they chased the car, they chased me to the airport on the last night. Anyway, I came back, and then I was meant to be in Lilongwe, because we were just finishing up the SACO. It was a welcome project for increasing research in 5 Southern African countries, which was Botswana, Malawi, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and South Africa. And the last one was in Lilongwe in Malawi. And I just phoned them up and said, look, I'm sorry, I won't make it. And I just thought, what a wimp I am. And after about 2 weeks of wimping around and taking a lot of painkillers, my son-in-law said, Parveen, this is not right. You're having a scan. So I had a scan and I'd fractured my pelvis. And once I knew I fractured my pelvis, I felt so much worse. Before I was okay. I could do it with it, but it's better not knowing.
Oh Lord! And then I mean the other trial and tribulation was your poor husband David, who's also a well-known doctor consultant at Roehampton, wasn't he? A chest physician. And tell us a little bit about David.
Well, David, dear, yeah. I mean, my world just ended when he died. It was difficult. He died in pain.
Yeah.
With metastatic renal cancer.
Yeah. He was a hero. And but then everybody said that you still carried on working. You did that bereavement.
I think,
how did it affect you?
The question is really loyalty, isn't it? If you say you're going to do something, you will do it. And I finally even had to go to Belfast because the lovely Dame Deirdre Hine had recommended me to be the English representative for their higher awards or something.
Yeah.
And it was literally about a week after David had died. So I told the people, but I said nobody's to talk about it because I was just cheers. And I carried on doing clinics. While David was in intensive care.
And he died age what, 59, 60?
He got at 59. He died at 61.
Yeah.
And the girls were lovely, and the family were lovely, and people like Mike Farthing and us, and they phoned me every day, to see I was all right, let alone David. So I was really very well supported by both friends and family, and
Yeah.
Anyway, it was a difficult time because those 3 years, my mother died, David died, and David's father died, and David was the only child, and his mother was amazing, really. That both the men and the family died, but she was incredible.
Yeah. So let's talk about leadership now, because again, people watching this will be inspired by you, and I guess they'll be thinking, well, if she did it, maybe I can do it too. I mean, of all the leadership roles that you've done, president of this, that, and everything else, does any one stand out? I mean, what lessons have you learned by trying to organize, for example, the BMA or NICE or the postgraduate deanship that you had, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, I think I tried to see it as, obviously, you arrive, you sort of case the joint, you meet everybody. And I think one of the things I always do if I go to a new thing, I go and meet, the RSM. I walked around the whole of the RSM, met the kitchen, met them upstairs, went to the top and looked at the air conditioning and so on. So you meet the people, and then you sort of find out what needs improving or what can you do better. So really, in everything that I've done, I think with the BMA, I made sure that the president actually had a job description, because at the time they said the president only shake hands, and I said I didn't want it then. I wanted to do something, and I concentrated there on. I had a couple of themes with education and research and the junior docs and the medical students. At the RSM, there were then 22,000 people, no altruistic arm. I said, where is it? And there wasn't one. So my theme there was with global health. And I was extraordinarily fortunate to have B. Setia, who then really set it on the map when he became president. B was very like-minded, and we got in people like Leslie Regan, and we, managed to set it up, which was just brilliant. And the other thing about the RSM, one of the things I think, don't do anything, don't ask anybody to do anything unless you do it yourself. So for the global health, I went to Liberia for the RSM, and I went with Merlin, a charity, and took along a young, Paul Summerfield was then the fundraiser, took along a young MP who talked about global health, in a maiden speech. And it was awful seeing, Liberia really affected me because it had everything. it's all the freed slaves coming across to Liberia, hence the word Liberia. And it was a civil war, and it was the most ghastly civil war which had gone on for 13 years. And I was there just after it, so saw the damage and, going to visit clinics and hospitals with nothing there, and clinics where, 11-year-old with HIV, how do you tell them? And a 12-year-old who's pregnant. I mean, we don't even understand what's going on. And the women were appallingly treated. They were just sort of vassals, really, of various other people. So that really affected me. And we came back, and I said, Paul, we're going to raise some money. He said, no, doctors are not, don't give very much money. I said, Paul, I'm sorry, they will. So 3 weeks, I said, right, I'm going to raise money so much for a new ward, a surgical ward in Liberia, near in Buchanan. And 3 weeks later, I sent Paul an email saying, I told you so, we'd surpassed the amount. And that ward was built, which is lovely.
Wow.
And just, going on this theme about women, women badly, we've really got to get equality here. But I mean, for example, I used to be a trustee of THET, Tropical Health and Education Trust, and they asked me to try and set up a thing between Barts and a new medical school in Axum. There's no money in it. We had to sort of do it, but it was the students and a very forthright registrar who sort of set it all up. And I was there, and I was doing a ward round and went to the A&E, and there was a woman who had been shot through her pelvis, and there was a plaster cast, and they pulled it down with strings over water bottles to have a traction with sandbags at the end. And I said, well, what's the future for her? Well, she also needs a CT scan, but the CT scan is 100 miles away by taxi. She can't afford that. So she'll die. And I said, well, I hope her husband will be put into jail. They said, no, he's a man. He's fine. He'll be off. Woman dies, man's okay. Can you imagine that?
Yeah.
And the other thing is that the ridiculous dichotomy between what the medical students are reading, what textbooks they're reading, or even reading mine, but worse still, they were reading 2 volumes of the American textbook. But what's the point of doing that when so you say, well, what would you do? And they say CT scan. Well, there isn't a CT scan. You want to know, well, how are you going to treat this person? And there's no common sense in actually having the right textbooks or the right place and the right sort of medicine.
Yeah.
They're all mesmerized by the West.
Yeah. The medical situation in large parts of Africa is absolutely dreadful. Beds with no mattresses, no equipment, or equipment that doesn't work. But the other thing you're involved in right now, bringing up to date, are the Uyghur women. You're involved in a tribunal or a commission. Yeah. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah. So this is a tribunal which was set up by I think the Uyghur asked Jeffrey Nice, the QC chairman, to set up. And really, I think you all heard about what's going on. I think what is, because we had a witness hearing in June, and certainly the newspapers got on. So I think it was all out there. And we were hearing some, awful stories. We were really there as a jury. We can't form any opinion, and I can't form an opinion now because we've got another hearing coming up. But it's a huge amount of reading, huge amount of work to get it right. And we've asked China to come and help us if they will. We've had very brave Uyghurs talking from all over the world and brought here to give witness. But I also, Roger, can't talk very much about it now because we're still in the midst of the.
So the women are treated worse than the men, or they're all treated badly?
Yeah, they're all treated badly. But get the brunt of the.
I mean, yeah. Well, tell us a little bit about the RMBF, because that's where I strongly associate you with that organisation, which does do.
I'm glad you do, because I think that's one of the best things I did. Well, I was asked to be president.
We should say the RS is the Royal Medical Benevolent Fund,
which has been going for a couple of 100 years. Now, you know, what the medical benevolent funds does is put doctors back on feet. It helps them, you know, financially. It helps them online for psychiatric problems and mental problems, mental health, and so on. And for example, you know, if you've got a young doctor who's has an accident and can't support his family, the RMBF will come along and support the family and maybe take a son through medical or a daughter to medical school if that's necessary. But I hadn't realized that doctors were living in abject poverty. These are our colleagues living in abject poverty. Absolutely ghastly. I mean, you can imagine the stress of the job. You know, you sort of maybe take a bit of drink, maybe go into drugs, you lose your family, and you end up living in a tiny room with a kettle, with, you know, a toilet maybe down the corridor somewhere. And we've really helped an enormous amount. We managed to, I think the year I finished, we managed to get about 30 people back on their feet again by retraining and getting them, you know, sorted and giving them money. And a lot of people have been extremely grateful for that. But again, you know, if you want a charity, please give to the RMBF because they really are doing a grand job there.
Yeah.
And Sheila, Baroness Sheila Hollings, who is also super, has taken it on and is doing a grand job pushing that as well.
Yeah. And I suppose you were involved in the setting up of NICE, weren't you? The National Institute for Clinical Excellence.
They always say there comes a time in life where you start applying for jobs, you get asked to do jobs. And I got this telephone call, and I was worried about telephone calls in the middle of the end of the weekend asking me to do things. And it was Mike Rawlins saying, I want you to apply. And I said, no, Mike, you know, he just become a knight. I said, hang on a moment, Mike, let me stand up and talk to you at attention. Anyway, I had to go through endless, you know, interviews and so on. Once I've been persuaded. And that was extraordinary, actually extraordinary, because this was the first time that clinical and cost effectiveness had been mentioned. Nobody had ever talked about that. So we had £10 million, and Mike said, before you get too excited, you know, 9.0 is already been spoken for. So we've got very little money. We've got no offices. We've got, hopefully we're going to get about 30 people sort of in-house. And he said, I just happen to have, we're going to chief executive. And he said, I just happen to have a man outside who I have interviewed. And I think it would be important that you accept him. So obviously, having heard that, we gave poor Andrew Dillon a real good tasting. But remember, these are non-execs. We haven't really met each other. You know, there's Tony and some wonderful non-execs that I've met and had the pleasure and the privilege really of working with. So really, it is astonishing how it took off. So it was extraordinarily very exciting for me because, you know, I'm good at editing. So I was editing all these huge, because we had to work out how we were going to work, what we were going to do. And of course, now NICE is now well known worldwide. Every other country wants it. And the tragedy about me again was that I had to resign from NICE because I was made chairman of the Medicines Commission. And although the Medicines Commission was safety, quality, and efficacy, and this was clinical and cost effectiveness, to my mind, there wasn't any contradictory, you know, conflict that I would have seen. But because the public thought it might be, I thought I better not, so I had to give it up.
Yeah. So Mike Rawlins was in, and you set it up, and then
that's nice of you to say that. Mike Rawlins and the team set it up.
The team, yeah. We've now got Gillian Leng as the CEO, and Andrew Dillon stepped down. Sir Andrew Dillon stepped down. He actually was the chief executive of St George's Hospital where I worked when I moved from Barts. Yeah. That just reminds me, mentioning the word Barts, because you were there at the same time as me when Virginia Bottomley, Mrs. Thatcher, who's another feisty lady, of course, feisty woman, of course, and Brian Mulwiney tried to shut Barts down. And there was you were part of the defense of Barts, weren't you?
Yes, I think they all came and they they said we've not come to. I mean, I remember Winnie arriving and saying, "I haven't come to tell you anything. I've just come to listen." But
Yeah.
actually, listen either. But it was, you know, I don't know whether I think Leslie, Mike Bess, and John Ross, I think, were the leaders for that fight.
Yeah.
I was at both ends. I'd been sent off. All the young consultants were sent off to the Homerton,
Yeah.
as well as, you know, doing both, which is what I was doing at the time. Anyway, so it was saved, but not in the same way as it ran before.
Right.
And then, of course, Barts and the London joined, leaving then the Homerton alone, and the Homerton was the satellite of Barts.
Right.
So it was an unpleasant time. But once that happened, I said, look, you know, we've got to be realistic. You know, we fought for it. We didn't get what we wanted, but let's just get on and make it best for the next situation. And then I was asked to take on the postgraduate. They were modeling the directorship of postgraduate education, the first one in the country, on me, basically, because they decided to try it on me. And I'd set up the Barts and the Homerton, and I had to say, they asked me to take on the London, which was a nightmare because overnight, something like 554 consultants who were fighting each other. And it was a ghastly time, but we managed it. We've now got a really very good setup.
Yeah.
Together.
And you're now involved in the 900th anniversary of St. Bartholomew's. Yes, that's exciting.
Yes. So Barts is going to be 900 years old in 2 years' time, and I'm also a member of the Barts charity, a trustee there, and also now been made the ambassador for the Barts for the medical school. So we're really going, hoping to try and raise some really significant amount of money to set up research areas, different areas around Bath for London, obviously Whipps Cross, because it's all one, all around that. So any Bath person listening to it, please, if you want to give some money, please contact me, said she.
Well, Marcus Setchell is involved.
Marcus is wonderful.
Yeah. We've had him on this show, and he's telling us about the restoration of the Great Hall with Will Palin, Sir Michael Palin's son. So they are indeed doing a brilliant job. So let's I mean, what of all the amazing things you've done, and we've only covered a small proportion. What are you most proud of, Parveen?
Oh dear, I think what I have been really privileged to do is really work with the most wonderful people. I mean, from the secretaries upwards. When I got my damehood, the DBE, I invited all the secretaries who'd helped me get it, and I said, "Look, ladies, it's not really for me. It's for the people that enabled it to happen. Sending me around the world. I mean, I hate to think what my carbon footprint was." But with packs saying who you're going to meet, who you're going to be talking to, where you're lecturing, where you're, obviously with the college physicians examining for the membership as well. So I think probably of all that I've done, I think it's got to be the book, because, as people tell me that, the two best names, the two best doctors known around the world would be Kumar and Clark.
Yeah.
But it's got me to places that I have been able to help. Hopefully, right. and perhaps so I think that would be better. But I think to me, my delight really has been teaching. I just absolutely adore teaching, and medical students and young doctors, we learn so much from them.
Yeah.
And how to talk to them. And
I think actually I'm going to read this question that Peter Simpson sent in, because I think it does illustrate. I mean, I've known you for 20, 30 years myself. And I mean, you're a people person. And it's nice that you're mentioning all the people who've helped you through your career. But Peter says, how do you remember people so well? In my retirement, after a career as an economist and a clergyman, I became a fellow of the RSM. You came and spoke to me at a reception in Wimpole Street. And I thought, how embarrassing. You're obviously muddling me up with somebody else. But you then said, you now live in Inverness, don't you? Indeed, I did, but it's quite beyond me how Parveen could remember me. I think that is a tribute in a way that, and maybe that's one of your secrets of success, that you're so good with people.
Well,
Would you agree with that? Or?
well, I think people are so lovely. I mean, I think people have been very good to me. So it's part of good manners, isn't it? Trying to know people and
Yeah.
good
Well,
manners.
a lot of people I know are interested in themselves and their immediate surroundings, but they're not that interested in other people in the same way that you are. So I think that is a characteristic of yours, and one, and also you've got that ability to, when you're talking to people, to make them feel as though they're important to you, and I think that
they
is.
are. I mean,
Yeah, right.
they are important.
Yeah, no,
Everybody's important.
absolutely right. Well, you have done some quite incredible things, really. Maybe we should. It's just about coming up to 8 o'clock. Any final thoughts? Any words of advice for the? We've got. I think there's a 20% increase on the people trying to get into medical schools at the moment. They've got an uplift of they've all got A stars because of, which is slightly crazy, but we won't go into that. But I mean, to all those young people just starting medicine, just starting medical school, what would you say to them, Parveen?
I think they've got to realize it's hard work, but I think the one thing I would say is have fun, because if you're not having fun, then everything is going to be that much more difficult.
Mm.
I mean, I have to say I've had a huge amount of fun, and it's been a huge privilege, really, working for the NHS. I mean, I really miss the teamwork, I miss the people, I miss the patients. But there comes a time you think, well, actually, I'm maybe not as sharp as I used to be, and maybe so in fact, I'm just about to trying to stop practicing from the GMC, but fill in forms.
Yeah.
Great problem, sir. Trying to fill in this form to say, can you take away my licensing? But I can still teach and do things that I want to do.
Yeah, and you're still writing too, as well. A lot of
well, I think that's the one blessing that I've had. It's I mean, the book became a huge responsibility as it took on the world, really. We've sold millions and tens of millions in pirated copies. And that was a huge responsibility, and we had to done properly, and we were very careful about that. But the joy of the moment is that I don't have to write, and I am sorry actually that the book did stop me doing research, because I had a good team, and I had I was doing quite well on celiac disease. There was days where it was quite early, and there was quite a lot to work on. So I think that was a sadness in my life. But luckily, I've been to the Hammersmith, and I've been to all the sort of places where the research has been instilled in me. In fact, I met David at the Hammersmith. He was my registrar. One of the stories about marrying David was there were two things that were sacrosanct about. He was incredibly bright, but the two things sacrosanct was the Monday night was quartet night, because he was a very, very good violinist, and Thursday night was sextet night, and I wasn't quite sure about the sextet bit, but there were a lot of them playing, and he used to play with another professor, another super guy called Derek Gibson. Used to play the harpsichord and violin, so every Monday David would come in, pick up his violin, and go off and play in a quartet, which had been going for 30 years down in Epsom. Amazingly, he had an amazing quartet.
He was a true star, and a sportsman, and an academic, and
no, I wouldn't say he was a sportsman. That's my grandchildren, my grandsons.
Oh, right.
William and Oliver, the sportsmen.
Right, William with his cricket bat.
He goes to bed with his cricket bat, and probably Oliver goes to bed with his cricket ball. I'm not quite sure. They're now youngsters. They're getting on to teenage.
Good for them. Parveen, we're running out of time. Claire Banion, who's one of our very precious trustees.
Super lady.
Yeah, she's asking about climate change, which of course, the island of Sicily and all the Greek islands on fire. We haven't got time to talk about that. We'll have to devote a whole program to climate change, but I know you're involved in the UK Health.
Yeah, so I'm the
Alliance,
ambassador with the UK Health Alliance for Climate Change, and
Yeah.
so I'm doing quite a lot on climate change at the moment. And
It's another problem in the world you're trying to solve, Parveen.
now I can't solve it, but I can certainly, I hope, be an advocate for it. And
And medical professionals can play a role, I think, talking to
oh,
them.
enormously. And I remember the public come to us, and how nice to be able to sort of talk to the public, and we can actually spread news, all sorts of things via the public.
Right, Parveen, we've got to stop because I'll be told off for running overtime if I don't stop. Well, thank you so much. I mean, actually, we could have kept this going for another hour because we've only really talked about a small proportion of the things that you've done. But don't go away because I just want to mention a few things. We've got next week, we have Simon, the inimitable Sir Simon Wesley, answering your questions for our Thursday lunchtime COVID series, very popular series, and we've got a great panel there. A few weeks from now in September, actually, we've got an extended Thursday program on vaccinations, and we've got Dame Sarah Gilbert talking, Sharon Peacock from Cambridge, fantastic lineup there. And in 2 weeks' time, because we're slowing down a little bit in August to reflect the holiday period, Lord Rivero, Bernie Rivero, one of my teachers, actually back at the Central Middlesex years and years ago. Lord Ribero was president of the Royal College of Surgeons and a fantastic individual. So we'll be talking to him about surgery and about his career and all the contributions he's made. So coming back to Parveen, Parveen, you get superstar status from the Royal Society of Medicine, which is a very rare privilege. And, congratulations for everything you've done. And thank you so much for talking to us about so much of the interesting things that have happened to you in your life. So farewell from
thank you very much.
Royal Society of Medicine. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.